Welcome to The Sound of Economics, the podcast series by Bruegel, the Brussels-based economic think tank. I'm Giuseppe Porcaro, and today we are going to discuss and dissect the State of the Union speech of Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, which was delivered on the 13th of September 2023. It is a traditional commentary which now since many years we've been establishing here at Bruegel. And also it is the last speech of this mandate of the current configuration of the Commission. So we are going to discuss also in light of this context. But before starting to discuss about it, I would like to welcome the guests today. We have Jaromír Zettelmeier, who is the director of Bruegel.
Thank you. Great to be here.
André Sapir, who is one of our senior fellows.
Nice to be here as well.
And Simone Tagliapietra, another senior fellow here at Bruegel.
Nice to be here.
So, André, Simone, and Jaromír, as I said before, this was the last State of the Union speech by the President of the European Commission before the European elections next year in 2024. Kind of as expected, von der Leyen started with a reference to these upcoming elections. And also, as expected, she did not reveal whether she will want to stand for a second mandate or not. And then she restated, of course, the support to Ukraine, framed this speech as responding to the call of history. So really, she put herself on a let's say higher plane of discussion. But also, as expected, she made a list of what the Commission has done in her mandate. We are going to go through all these kind of things. She spoke about the Geopolitical Commission, the Green Deal, the recovery plans, the management of the pandemic, and so on. And she stated that she has delivered over 19% of the political guidelines which she presented to the European Parliament back in 2019. Now, I look at you, Jaromír. I would like you perhaps to kick off this conversation by giving us your general impressions on the speech overall, and then I would like to ask the same to the other guests.
Right. So I mostly like the speech. We will obviously get to the parts that I and others liked less well. So I thought it was generally a strong speech, an assertive speech, one where she rightly took credit. I think the 90% number is probably broadly right. Of course, we are not happy with all elements of the execution of her agenda, but she had a very powerful, a very ambitious agenda. She largely delivered on this agenda. I agree with you that it was not a campaign speech, other than, taking credit. And for the most part appropriately, with one small twist, which is that she has a sort of outlook at the end in the context of enlargement. And in that, she mentions a whole bunch of unfinished projects in the context of we can't finish these projects even with 30 plus members, right? And so since this enlargement is in the future and these projects are unfinished and many of them were started under her presidency, there's a sense of, let me complete what I started. So in that sense, that's a little caveat. Now, the main reason why I like the speech is that I think she struck a good balance between a geopolitical Europe in which we stand up to our rivals, while also signaling continued openness and cooperation. And so I think that she did generally well. So most obviously in the context of her bids on China, she wants to cooperate with China as well as stand up to it. The biggest news item of the speech, obviously, was the investigation into Chinese EV practices. So this is anti-China, but it's also squarely within WTO law. I'm sure André will want to say something for that. So there is no sense of a US-style disregard for multilateralism. And while there was a lot of emphasis on industrial policy, This came mostly under the heading of the Green Deal and geopolitics, but on the economy stricto sensu, she was talking more about traditional horizontal policies, particularly skills. Now, there wasn't enough on that for my taste, particularly very little on EU governance and single market deepening, but we will get back to that later. Final point, balance also on Ukraine. So strong support is expected, extending temporary protection to Ukrainians in the EU, continued financial support, strong support for enlargement to 30 plus, but at the same time emphasizing that, I quote, accession is merit-based and the Commission will always defend this principle.
Thank you, Jeremy, for those initial remarks. And I would like to pass the mic to André for your own take.
I very much concur with Jeremy that this was a good, even a strong speech. In a sense, it was easy for her to give such a strong speech because indeed, I do agree that she has a strong record to defend. This was not an easy presidency of the Commission. Obviously, with COVID, with Ukraine, with a number of other major issues, and she had a flagship project, the European Green Deal, that was at the start a flagship project, and then came those other issues. And I think she did both on the Green Deal and on what popped up, the COVID and Ukraine. I think she did very well. So she has a strong record, and therefore she gave a strong speech. Doesn't mean that I liked everything in her speech. Let's say I liked 90%. Use her own figure, and maybe at the end of our discussion, I will say what I did not like. I'm a data-driven person. Therefore, what I did, I looked at the speech and I removed the introduction and the conclusion, and I counted how much words she devotes to different topics. And the 5 topics that she discusses are the European Green Deal, the economy, social and competitiveness, digital and AI, 4th topic, global migration and security, and the 5th, Ukraine. In terms of number of words that she devotes to each of those topics, the biggest one is Ukraine, actually. So it comes last, and some commentators have said, well, Ukraine comes last. Well, may come last, but in fact, it's the biggest topic in terms of the words that she devotes. 27% of the speech is about Ukraine and enlargement. The second topic is the European Green Deal, 23%. And the third topic is the economy, social and competitiveness with 21%. And the other 2 topics are much below that. So that gives an idea about priorities. And I think to my liking, that's perfectly fine. The second thing that I would say, and I will stop with that, is I counted the countries of the regions that she mentions in her speech, something that I always do. By far, the number 1 country being mentioned is Ukraine. 21 times is Ukraine being mentioned. The second one is China, Chinese, etc., 9 times. Then comes India, 4 times. Africa, all of Africa, 4 times. Asia, all of Asia, 3 times. The US, 3 times. And Latin America, twice. Britain, the UK, gets no mention at all. So lots of things to discuss as we go to the different topics, and I will hold my fire for the deeper discussion.
Thank you, André. And you created a little bit of suspense and a little bit of, we will want to hear more on those issues, and we will indeed going section by section to go a little bit more in depth in what she said over there. But the ball to Simone for his own initial remarks and impressions.
Thank you, Giuseppe. What I would add is to say that, yes, it's true. She didn't provide signals about whether or not she want to run for the second mandate. But I think that indirectly, the message she has been giving out is pretty clear. Look at the journey so far. it has been so good. Do you guys really want to change driver at this point of the journey? So I think she's at that point where she doesn't need now to launch her candidature for the second mandate because, give time to time. Timing is very important in these things. And I think for the moment, she can create this more, I would say, subtle need for her to stay over. So like people will actually ask her to stay over, right? So I think that is perhaps the soft approach she is adopting here. And I think this approach could actually be something that would be very positive for her future. Now, when it comes to the content, I think we largely agree this was about legacy. And she was completely right when she said that the European Green Deal is now the centerpiece of the economy. I think most of the achievements she has been discussing and the famous 90% mentioned before, I think that is perfectly reflected on all the legislation that the EU managed to push forward when it comes to the European Green Deal. However, when she moved into the industrial dimension of the European Green Deal and the growth strategy promise that was a bit at the foundation of the initiative, I think, let's say, she was a bit bullish, to be kind, because it is, in my view, not true that we still see this growth strategy at play. This remains, in my view, something that we need to build. The industrial dimension of the European Green Deal is what we haven't been really developing in the last years. That's the big missing part of the mosaic. And that's what will need to be at the core of the upcoming institutional cycle. So on the one hand, I fully agree and support the claim that the legacy here is extremely strong on green and other things. But a lot of things remain to be done. And I think that will be for the future to see. One last point, if I may, on Africa. I think she has been stressing very much the importance of Africa and overall the fact that this commission has become a geopolitical commission, also given the international dynamics it was in. And I think this could be indeed a key component also for a future agenda, namely when it comes to the development of the Team Europe approach and in specific of the Global Gateway, that remains an initiative that needs really now to be scaled up and developed.
Thank you, Simone. And I would like to pick up on your words on the Green Deal for opening, let's say, a first section of the analysis of her speech on that topic, because she started exactly for the reasons that you all fleshed out, that this was the big flagship, and she said, we stay on course, we stay ambitious. However, you already mentioned some remarks on that. Beyond the listing of the actual achievements that have been, my question to you, and Simone, maybe you can be the one replying first on that, is that, my question is there in reality a fatigue in that flagship? We have seen in the debate which followed the speech, the debate among the parliamentary representatives, some harsh words against Timmermans, for example, which were, I would say, not typical of a very, let's say, politically correct kind of, even if, politically motivated kind of reaction. This was like almost a personal attack against Timmermans from opposition parties during the question time. So this makes the debate on one hand more engaging. Maybe it means that actually this is a more political commission. But what does it mean about the future? You mentioned about the future of the initiative and the ambition of the Green Deal.
I think that, some in the parliament have reacted by criticizing also certain approaches by this commission on the green agenda. And also at the national level, we have seen in the last months increasing number of voices being raised against the European Green Deal in itself, its ambitions and all of that. Last but not least, the German Finance Minister Lindner said yesterday that the EU buildings energy efficiency policy could threaten social peace in Europe. So that was very strong to be said by a finance minister, and specifically of an important country like Germany. And that is a bit the reflection of a problem that we see coming up, right? Together with Jean Pisani-Ferry and Georg Zachman, we have published at the occasion of our annual meetings last week a paper exactly devoted to this issue. What's next for the European Green Deal? This commission has been extremely good at setting targets, unleashing the legislation to start moving in that direction. But now comes the time of implementation. And time of implementation means that decarbonization will need to enter transport sector, so cars, buildings. So climate policy will, in the coming years, to be serious, need to enter the daily life of people. And therefore, the process will become increasingly challenging, also politically. And we are afraid we are not fully equipped at the EU level to deal with this, because we have shortcomings in our institutional setting. We will have shortcomings when it comes to EU funding, namely after the end of Next Generation EU. And therefore, there is a long way to go to ensure that we can actually implement the European Green Deal. And when you go to the industrial side of things, she mentioned the launch of these clean transition dialogues that will be managed by Maroš Šefčovič with the industry in order to make sure that the industry is on board. Well, that's also a very important component, but certainly the industrial dimension of the European Green Deal cannot be solved with these transition dialogues alone, right? So much more will have to be done when it comes to clean tech, but also when it comes to the European industrial landscape overall. Let's recall that Europe is in a very delicate moment when it comes to its industrial competitiveness, because even if we manage, as she said very clearly, 1 year ago at this point of time, the gas price in Europe was 300 euro per megawatt hour. Today is 30 euro per megawatt hour. So Europe managed to go through the storm, but energy prices in Europe remain today 4 times higher than before the crisis. And we see this denting European industrial competitiveness, namely the energy intensive industries are suffering a drop in the output in Germany and elsewhere by 20%. And this is the key challenge we are facing, and we will be facing for the next 10 years, because that's the new normal we are in. And until renewables will structurally lower energy prices, there will be a long way to go. And the question, how do we react to this? How do we really put in place a workable industrial policy that can ensure a smooth transition? I think this remains the key open question.
Well, and on the industrial policy, this is the big topic, I would say, of the speech. We come in a second, but I would like to hear from Andrea and Jeromin if they have some reaction to what you said about the Green Deal section.
I would also agree with Simone. Obviously, very good record, but much of what needs to be done is ahead of us. Although she has put, or her commission has put forward elements. She doesn't use the term, I think, industrial policy. She uses the term industry or industrial strategy. Actually, I found a speech on this, but on other parts as well, but on the green part. It had the Biden-like tonality. Actually, the entire speech. If we were in the US, this would have been definitely a Democratic Party speech. The leader of the Democratic Party and the Republicans attacking that speech on various fronts, including what we heard from Lindner yesterday. So yes, in a sense, it is a center left. It's a center. She's a centrist, but slightly on the left, and we will talk later about social dialogue. I mean, she peppered her speech with a number of sort of left appealing issues. On the industry strategy, there, in a sense, it is an issue that has an appeal, in fact, and I think it's partly also the problem of the industry strategy everywhere, whether it's in Europe or in America or in any other country. It's an issue that is potentially appealing to the left and to the right. It appeals to the left because she talks like Biden. She talks of creating good jobs. She doesn't say good labor union jobs, but basically that's what she meant, or she implied. So again, very, very Biden-like. So yes, industry and vibrant industry, this is good for jobs, for the quality of jobs, for prosperity, all of this. Yes. So this is appealing to the left. To the right, she's also appealing to the industry side, to the industrialists, because there can be some elements of defending industry, including with protectionist or potentially protectionist instruments. So the flag of industry and of industrial strategy is a strategy that can catch both left and the right to see, yes, we all, who is not in favor of a strong European industrial base, both on the left and on the right. But, I think, yes, those are issues, and we shall see little by little, and probably in her next mandate, as I'm sure there will be one, how she fills that space.
Jaromír, since we started to discuss about industrial policy, I think that we are definitely in that territory now of the speech, and she said quite a lot of things, so I'm pretty sure that you want to react both to André and Simone, as well as moving on that part.
So let me start by starting to reframe some things that Simone did, and maybe disagree a tiny little bit on the emphasis. So the Green Deal is in trouble, as beautifully explained in Simone's recent policy brief with Jean Pisani-Ferry and Georg Zachmann, which we published last week, fundamentally for two reasons. One is the governance problem or incentives problem that comes from the fact that targets are formulated at the European level, but the implementation has to be national, and that a lot of the competencies that relate to the implementations are intrinsically national because they relate to energy policy. And then the second fundamental reason why the Green Deal is in trouble is that as we accelerated, the distributional impact will become more pronounced. So this will make some people a lot worse off. So this essentially gilets jaunes spectrum could be a much wider spectrum, and politicians are starting to feel that. And for that reason, there might be a backlash. None of this has anything to do at this point with industrial strategy. So the fact that, clean tech in Europe is not developing as fast as we might like, or that we may even lose, offshore wind, things like that are bad. But of course, in an open system, they will not intrinsically slow down the energy transformation in Europe, because we can more cheaply import these things from somewhere else. That's actually the reason why, wind is in trouble. However, I do agree that the lack or the difficulty in asserting ourselves in this area and becoming more competitive does create an indirect problem, namely through the political economy of the Green Deal. And so here, of course, the failure to create green jobs that substitute for brown jobs will make the current manufacturer workers more resistant to transition. And on the other side, if we were to develop a very thriving clean tech industry, this would create a lobby, essentially a constituency for accelerated green change. So these things are linked, but they are linked in far more subtle ways than, for example, the preamble of the Net Zero Industry Act would suggest. Now, on the industrial strategy, I think we have not come very far, and the fundamental reason for that is because we have much fewer instruments at the EU level than our main competitors have. And in particular, we don't have strong fiscal instruments. She does call for them. But, by and large, what we have put on the table in this regard, particularly in the Net Zero Industry Act, is really weak. It is conceptually weak for reasons that we have explained, because it's not technology open, but it is also weak in its instruments. And so the EU is going to have to struggle with this. And we have some ideas for how to improve that, but they do involve more money at the EU level.
Thank you, Jaromír. And one of the biggest announcements in this section was the launching of an anti-subsidy investigation into electric vehicles coming from China. She said, quote unquote, global competition is good for business, but competition is only true as long as it is fair. That's not the only thing that she said about global stuff linked to industrial policy and linking it up, the geopolitics with the green transition at the same time. But perhaps let's start on the electric vehicles issue, which was the big drop, let's put it like that, of the speech. André?
This issue of the Commission launching, which it has the power to do, to launching an investigation on subsidies by China for electric vehicle, that was already being discussed for several months. And everybody knew that there are essentially two sides of the discussion. Let's call it the French side and the German side. It is a proposal that, was very much supported by the French government and by some car manufacturers in France who were fearing competition of electric vehicle coming from China. And then there is Germany, which is on cars that are on a higher, let's say, quality than the French cars, and at the moment are fearing somewhat less the competition from China, and is also much more present in China as a market and as a place of production of cars, including electric vehicles. So I think there was a tussle within the EU, within the Commission, about whether or not to launch this investigation. To me, it did not come as a surprise at all. I'm afraid that I've seen it all on this. And what I mean by that, I remember obviously the situation with Japan 30, if not 40 years ago, when Japan started to make inroad in the EU, but also in the US market for cars that were cheaper and of better quality than the European cars. They were cheaper because they were using just on-time production, something that, we discovered from Japan. So it's Japan that imported something that then everybody moved to. And also they were producing, frankly, better quality cars at the price. And those cars were making an inroad. And that resulted in all kinds of trade policy impediments that resulted in lower imports of cars from Japan than would have been the case otherwise, but then forced those Japanese producers to come and produce cars in the European market and in the US market in order to be able to sell those cars in Europe and in the United States. So that an investigation is launched. Why not? Again, this is perfectly legitimate. This does not violate any rule, nor European nor WTO rules, and it may even be the case. Let's see what the investigation finds. Whether or not the investigation does find that there were subsidies, then it will be up to the Commission and ultimately the member states to decide whether we should impose anti-subsidy duties, what one calls countervailing duty. So we are not yet there. So there is a process, and that process is perfectly fine, is perfectly legal. There will be, however, just like there was before, there will be a political issue. Is this in our European interests? Even if there are subsidies, not because there are subsidies that we are obliged automatically, or that the Commission is obliged automatically to propose subsidies. One could decide that this is not in our interest, or the member states could decide that this is not in interest. We shall see, and we shall see also what kind of remedy the Commission proposes. Certainly, they will enter into negotiation with China. There's no doubt about that. So we'll see where we end up. Obviously, it would be a pity if the technological advances that China has made in the domain of electric vehicle, which is significant, was not going to benefit consumers in Europe. So we have to see, even if there are subsidies, and subsidies they probably are, as there are subsidies everywhere. No, there is no country, nor Europe, nor the US, nor China, where the climate policy, the Green Deal, or the electric vehicles are not receiving subsidies. So we will have to see how we act on that in a sector which is important for Europe, is important for China, it's important also for the green transition. So we are at the start of this discussion, really. So now, yes, the Commission will launch an investigation, and let us see what are the next steps in that investigation, what are the results of the investigation, and on those results, what kind of measures the Commission proposes, and what the Council will ultimately decide, and what negotiation there will be with China as a result of those findings.
Simone, you are eager to react to this.
Well, I think that President von der Leyen cannot get to the European elections with the accusation of not acting to protect the European industry. That's how I would read the wind power package she announced in the speech. And that's how I would read this surprise announcement, but not so surprise announcement, as Andrea would say, about the anti-subsidy for the Chinese electric vehicles. As Andrea said, this is a process, and it sends out a signal that the Commission is not naive, that the Commission wants to understand what's really happening. I very much agree with what Jeremy said at the beginning. This is not a protectionist kind of approach they are taking. The idea here, in my view, is pretty clean. We do believe in comparative advantages. We just want to understand if these comparative advantages are real or artificially boosted by state support in China when it comes to electric cars. And that's very important, because that's about fairness, that's about level playing field and all of that. Now, should this lead to the conclusion, this process lead to the conclusion that this comparative advantage is artificially boosted by the Chinese, then, as Andrea said, we will need to understand how to calibrate the response, not compromising our own interests when it comes also to the Chinese market and the access to the Chinese market. But in my view, in both scenarios, that this ends up saying that there is or there is no artificially boost, this needs to go in parallel with the industrial policy agenda we were previously discussing, right? So the two things are not mutually exclusive. The two things need to go in parallel. But from a geopolitical, let's say, perspective, I think the signal that von der Leyen is sending out here is we will use whatever we have in the toolkit to make sure that we basically protect our interest, understanding then that open trade and a fair trade is at the core of our interest. So with that regard, I think the approach is truly different from what the Americans have recently been taken up.
Jaromír?
Nothing much to add. I mean, I agree that this is the essential difference between Bidenomics and what von der Leyen put forward. I think on trade, I actually felt more reminded in her rhetoric of President Clinton in the 90s, and the emphasis on openness but fairness. So this was the, multilateralist version of a democratic president. On other points, particularly industrial policy, I agree with Henri.
So, speaking of the global outlook and trade, and moving from China to global supply chain, because one of the other cornerstone of her speech was economic security, and again linked to the China strategy, the reminding everyone that the strategy is to de-risk and not to decouple. And he has been repeating this in several parts, and especially referring to two things. I mean, one was the trade deals that should be ratified soon, sooner than later, but also the other strategy towards international partnerships, and I refer here to the Global Gateway, and specifically mentioning this project of direct connection between India, the Arabian Gulf, and Europe, with a rail link that will make trade between India and Europe 40% faster, according to her words. So that was another, let's say, quite a big part of the speech, linking all these things that we said to the global arena. André, I turn towards you again.
Yes, I think interesting stuff, a bit light nonetheless in what she said there, but sort of the right words or the right tone. First, I'd like to say that she did speak, and I think that is good. She spoke about social dialogue. And she spoke about the Belgian presidency and saying that there is an agreement with the Belgian presidency that there will be a summit of social partners during the Belgian presidency, that is during the next semester. And I think that is a good idea. I think social dialogue, for which the EU is not so well equipped. It's the member states, obviously, that are dealing with issues of social dialogue. But I think it's important, and especially at a time when inflation is high. There are a number of issues on the Green Deal, a number of matters of political economy that are difficult at a time of major transformation of our economies. Right, the Green Deal is that, but also the high inflation, and all of this do require social cohesion. So social dialogue is important, and I was personally pleased that she and the Belgian government agreed basically on that for the next semester. On the trade agreements, yes, she did say that the free trade agreement that are being negotiated at the moment with Australia, with Mexico, with Mercosur, long-standing negotiation, but signed but not yet ratified. She says that she hopes that those deals will be completed by the end of this year. And then she said that the deal with India and Indonesia, free trade agreements that are also currently being negotiated, she's hoping that this will be done soon after that. And we shall see about that. But she did say smart trade delivers good jobs and prosperity. So she was indeed, as Jaromír said, on the open side of the discussion. On the link between the sort of what she called the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor with that famous train link, why not? I would like to see that to believe it, but I don't know. Where I was disappointed, it was on Africa. I think Europe's Africa policy is really not where it should be at all. It partly, I think, is due to the fact that French policy towards its former colonies is certainly not where it should be, as we have seen in recent weeks, including with the earthquake in Morocco and the reaction of Morocco, which has been so far not to welcome French assistance that has been proposed by President Macron. So France has clearly a difficult relationship with its former colonies, and that does not help Europe, a united Europe, to have a policy, a coherent policy towards Africa and a forward-looking policy. And it's a policy where, for us, it's the fear of African migrants. That's basically what the European policy is all about. And we have not yet been able to put forward, a coherent policy, and a policy that responds to the needs of Africa, not to our needs of fear of migration. What are the needs of Africans here? So, and this is not there in the speech either. This is one of my two disappointments with the speech. So Africa, which she does mention, but not, it's not just her. I mean, Europe is not managing to get its act together towards Africa in a progressive manner that responds to the interest of Africa, to the young Africans, and the young Africans are the majority of the Africans.
Jaromír.
I agree with André on Africa, and on the broader strategy. I think the difficulty will be to reconcile the emphasis on an international economic security strategy, which I think is very good, with the made in Europe sort of dog whistles that are also in the speech. I mean, to her credit, the made in Europe comes up in a context which makes it almost meaningless. So the quote is, "The future of our clean tech industry is made in Europe." And so this is, of course, a tautology, because how else could, our clean technology not be made in Europe? So she didn't say the future of the Green Deal or the technology fueling the Green Deal has to be made in Europe and so forth. But the words obviously panders to EU nationalist instincts, and you then ask yourself, how can this be reconciled with a credible strategy towards developing countries, emerging markets other than China, in which we have to take their own desire to develop industrially very seriously. Right? I mean, that is the problem. And when we are going for a subsidies-based industrial policy, we are making life more difficult, not just for the Chinese or for the Americans, if that's what she has in mind, but also for precisely the South that she's wooing through the global gateway. And on the railway, I mean, I agree with André, it cannot hurt, but on the other hand, it feels so much like a copy of the BRI, right? That it's kind of, is this going to be it? I mean, because the BRI is full of pitfalls, and this sort of infrastructure-based approach is full of pitfalls. So I felt a little ambivalent on that.
Also, we've been seeing that Chinese people have been building railways quite fast, and we still have some issues to get fast rail connections between Italy and France,
or to get trains running on time, like in Germany.
Exactly, but beside that, this is more like a joke aside. To conclude this part and then moving towards the end of our episodes, because we don't have so much time, even though, of course, all the issues could deserve an episode, a standalone episode of The Sound of Economics. One last big thing or big announcement by the President von der Leyen regarding the protecting European industries and this whole narrative of fostering competitiveness has been the announcement of a report on the future of European competitiveness by Mario Draghi. I don't know if any of you would like to comment on that specific point. It seems quite punctual, but it is also very specific, to mention a report by former president of the European Central Bank and former Prime Minister of Italy and so forth.
A wise choice, but André will have a more detailed perspective.
Well, look, I think, as Jeremy said, a wise choice. Mario Draghi is obviously a very not only wise person, a doer, somebody with lots of experience and who knows very well what are the problems of European competitiveness. And I'm sure one of the issues that he will want to emphasize in his report is the matter of capital markets, and I think that should be good. He could really help for that. At the same time, the report will come out at the end of the commission, so not much will be done. And reports. I was together with others responsible for a report commissioned by President Prodi about 20 years ago. And I think the report was excellent also. I'm sure Mario Draghi will be even much better than our report was. But a report then needs action. So, for my money, obviously, I would hope that Mario Draghi is chairing this committee and his report will lead to him become a senior vice president in charge of competitiveness. That's really what we need. We don't need another report. We need action at this stage. So it would be great that Mario Draghi will put his weight behind that, but the weight then needs to lead to real action, and that will be for the next commission. So, let's hope that Mario Draghi will join the commission and will take that responsibility.
So we need to get Mario Draghi a new citizenship passport in order to join the next commission. If I may intervene here in the sense that I'm pretty sure that the current Italian government might want someone close to the current government, and here without any kind of in a very neutral manner I'm saying about that. So we are really going towards the end of this, but we cannot leave this conversation without mentioning the end of the speech of Ursula von der Leyen about enlargement and governance. Enlargement was supposed to be, it was pre-announced as the big topic of this speech, but in the end, it was present, but really towards the end, as well as governance, which is going to dominate as well the electoral discussion. So perhaps some reflections on that, and maybe on something that was completely missing from that. And I'm looking at Jeromin. Where did we hear, or did we hear anything about economic governance, for instance, or capital market unions, which André just mentioned as fundamental?
Right. So why don't I take the economic governance part, and I'm sure André will want to add to that and also talk about enlargement. So for me, the single biggest failure of the von der Leyen Commission in its final year has been to connect the geopolitical and competitiveness agenda to governance, internal governance reform, economic governance reform. So these things have proceeded in parallel. And if anything, the focus on Net Zero Industry Act and industrial policy has taken the momentum out of single market reform, when she could have done the opposite, like we suggested in a paper in February on how the EU should react to the challenge of the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States, which is to say, this really shows that we need to do something about the structural inferiority of the EU vis-a-vis the US or China for that matter, which is the lack of a true internal single market, and particularly with vis-a-vis the US, often internal capital market. So these single market topics almost didn't come up in the speech. The CMU, Capital Markets Union, did not come up at all. Fiscal governance reform did not come up at all. And, the economics part of the speech talked about skills and some improvement in business environment for SMEs. So that's how it came up, and it was weak. And so this speech is very much in character with this failure to connect these two agendas, even though they are of astonishing importance. And I think, if you ask the Commission, do you think it's important to pass the economic governance review by the end of this legislature? They would say, yes, it's fantastically important, but not a word of it in this speech. So this was a little bit disappointing. And so, in a sense, mentioning Mario Draghi was kind of the placeholder for this agenda, because I'm pretty sure that his report is going to be a lot about this.
Andre?
No, I think completely agree with Jeremy. I think he said something very important, sort of connecting the internal agenda and the external agenda. So here, there was probably too much on the external. So there's an external challenge, and there needs to be an internal response, and the internal response needs indeed addressing those structural weaknesses that Jeremy just indicated: the internal market, CMU, which is basically also a single market matter, and fiscal governance. So I think that is right, and I think that should be a priority. And indeed, one can assume that in his report, Mario Draghi will very much emphasize that. So, if I may, since it's probably my last chance to say something in this discussion about the State of the Union report, I would like to flag one element of disappointment that I had with the speech. Is a word that was never mentioned, a word which is dear to me, which is the word multilateralism. And I thought that it's a word that had figured in previous speeches by President von der Leyen, both in Brussels and also by European leaders when they go to New York at the UN. I'm sure, and Mrs. Ngozi, the Director General of the WTO, will have noted that word was not mentioned, and I'm sure she will be as sorry, maybe more than I am. I think it's an element that is important. In a sense, that was my problem with this Biden-like speech. It was on this also something that Biden would have done. He would not have mentioned multilateralism. He would have been maybe sounding a bit more protectionist than we did. And she was indeed more open. She was more careful. For instance, when she speaks about China, is the only time that she uses the word cooperation. So, she says, we have all kinds of problem with China, but we need to cooperate with China. I think that was great. I think it would have been better even if she had put that in a multilateral framework. Multilateralism is in great difficulty, and in part, obviously, because of the rivalry between the US and China, but also certainly because the aggression of Russia, one of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, against Ukraine. So yes, multilateralism is in difficulty, and Europe has been usually the standard bearer of multilateralism. And so I very much regretted that she did not find a small space to utter once that word multilateralism.
Andre, and with this remark, of course, we could comment again and start another conversation now on this, but We will, of course, because we look at those aspects in other episodes of The Sound of Economics. So unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for this episode, and I will have to thank you all for your participation to this very quick commentary. Just a few hours after the speech of Ursula von der Leyen, and I would like to remind all our listeners that they can read in open access all the analysis by our scholars. A lot of this analysis, as was mentioned and referenced during this conversation, can go a little bit more in depth into some of the issues that we discussed today. And they are all downloadable on our website, www.bruegel.org. Thank you so much, and until next time, bye-bye.